So, in this episode, I wanted to talk about one of the most important parts of Ness's journey, and that is the 8 soundstone, the 8 melodies, the 8 Your Sanctuary locations that he has to discover and push through towards to ascend to his higher level to a degree. At least that is the end result after he gets all these melodies and such. And as Buzz says, he has to, with these locations, he has to unite his own energy, his own power with the earth itself. But yeah, I do have a lot to say about this. So what I'm gonna show you next is going to be a relatively long section of gameplay, which is just going to show you all these locations, part of the boss fight. You know, if you don't have the time or whatever, you can obviously skip this next part, but I would implore you to look at them at least, and as usual, do your own interpretations, possibly whatever you might feel or see from these as you're seeing them yourself. And then after that gameplay, I'm going to do as usual my interpretations, and alright, I'll see you then. So, one of the first things I wanted to talk about was the actual, not just the sanctuary locations, but the sanctuary guardians that blocks your path to all of these sanctuary locations themselves. While I don't really think, well, I'm not sure. It's just for me, the sanctuary guardians theme, or what they are themselves, to me, I couldn't really interpret much from it besides the obvious, where they just are kind of themed around the dungeon that at least the enemies that make up the dungeon before the actual sanctuary guardian fight themselves. Like Titanic Ant, the dungeon is full of bugs, insects like ants, small insects like ants, slugs, I guess mice, small animals and such. So I don't really think, at least I can't think of anything that the bosses themselves represent that I can really think of besides just being themed around what the dungeon that they are located in represents in a way. However, the guardians in themselves, just their presence, I think, is more an interesting thing to consider here, because all of the other enemies or antagonists, I guess you could say, throughout the story so far, they've been kind of having a direct effect on the surrounding people or the town or whatever. The peace that was there once is now gone, or something of that nature. Like injecting human problems basically to the places, that kind of thing. With the Sanctuary Guardians, it's, for the most part, kind of completely different. Like, the locations are generally kind of just isolated from all the other parts of this society or whatever. Like, maybe not 100% here, like, this is not a, like, across the board with all of them, but stuff like Giant Step, it's in a cave, kind of on the outskirts of Onet, even though it's pretty close to Onet. But, it's on the outskirts. It's the dungeon and the enemies in there, at least are not really bothering, quote-unquote, anybody around the area. Same thing with Lilliput Steps. The cave is right in a city, basically, or right near a city, that being the Blue cultist village. But the monsters aren't really coming out or anything. They're just kind of hanging out in there, absorbing the power or whatever of that location. Or my conclusion here is that these guardians, they're not really there as minions of Gygus, like so many of the other enemies and antagonists throughout the world that you encounter are. They are more something of nature in a way. They're like, all of them are basically like sort of natural beings to a degree, or it's not 100% true, but it's pretty across the board here. Like I said, they aren't like directly affecting the environment around them, it seems, for the most part. They're just kind of there as a part of nature almost. And I would say that the Sanctuary Guardians in this regard are more like they're there blocking Ness's path, but they're there as like a rite of passage to his locations, like a feat or a test of strength, if you will. And, if they weren't there, it'd be kind of like with our life, or whatever you want to call it, our journey, our experience here. Like, if you didn't have those walls, if you didn't have those barriers blocking you, it wouldn't really be like an accomplishment, or it wouldn't be like something that you grow from, or it wouldn't be something that you do. It would be just something that like is given to you in a way. So without these things, you could say that they would be like enemies in a way, or things that aren't there to help you, but they're there And they do help you, like maybe not intentionally, but they do in a way. They're a test of strength. And when you pass your test of strength, you are earning, in a more proper sense, what you know you have the right to, I guess in this sense, where Ness, he has the right, these are his sanctuary locations, these are for him, and he earns his right to claim them as his own, I guess you could say. You know, it wouldn't be nearly as useful to him or to anybody. He was just given his sanctuaries. He was just given them. Like, he has to earn them first. And, you know, pretty long explanation there to that, but that's how I look at the sanctuary guardians and such. They're not enemies, but they're there to be test of strength in a way, even if they're not intentionally trying to help Ness or whatever, consciously trying to do it. That's what they are there for. Alright, so finally, we are now going to get onto the main topic of the video, the actual sanctuary locations themselves, and what at least I have attempted to interpret from them, and what they are and what they look like and all that sort of thing. Before that, I want to say that while all 8 of these, at least on the soundstone and the melody and such, they all go together in a seeming ordered sequence, but in the actual game, you do not have to do these in an ordered sequence as far as I am aware for most of them. Like, for Giant Step, you have to do that one to progress. Lilliput Steps, you could skip. Milky Well, you could skip. Rainy Circle, I'm pretty sure you could skip. Magnet Hill, Pink Cloud, you could skip. Lumen Hall, you need to go past to actually get to the next section. And Fire Spring, you could technically skip. So, like 3/8, or maybe like even 1/4 of all these you could completely skip for the entire game, until you get past a certain point where you have to actually get all the melodies to progress further. So, you could technically get them all out of order almost. While my interpretation, I initially thought it was going to be somewhat sequentially important to have them all in like a proper sequence or whatever, one at a time, but then I kind of realized, at least for my interpretations, it really doesn't need to be that, but maybe it has a little bit of significance to it, but I don't really think so. So, whatever your interpretations, you could kind of do whatever, because they can go, you could get them in almost any order anyway, so I don't think that really matters. Alright, but besides that, let's get on to the actual locations themselves. So, the first one, Giant Step, is one that you are required to get, and I actually think that has some significance to it to a degree, because while I already did a video on this where I had in much more detail at that time, explaining what my thought of what I think that this location Giant Step represents. So, if you want to see that, go back to, I think, part number 2 of this series, and you'll get a much more detailed explanation of that one, at least. So, in this one, it's just going to be a summary of it, basically. Giant Step, I think it basically means the first, but also kind of one of the most important steps in Ness's, as well as our, because, you know, we're kind of using Ness as an avatar in our own way, so we're kind of doing this journey in a way through Ness's shoes, I would say. So that's why I'm going to be saying Ness's as well as our spiritual journey a lot through this. But at least in this case, this is the first step of Ness's spiritual journey here, is when he finds this Giant Step, and he really does initially kind of break through the programming, I guess you could say, or the kind of barriers that we also had to go through in the same regard through our own journey as well. And that's what I view Giant Step to be. Once again, episode 2, probably much better worded in that one, but yeah, that's basically what I saw from Giant Step. Now, the next one, Lilliput Steps. I had to do a lot, well, not a lot, but I had to do a little bit of research, I guess you could say, online, because I didn't even know what a Lilliput was. And I actually found that Lilliput is something that is often referenced in a lot of other media as well, because it's from the novel or the story or the book or whatever. Just one of those things that was probably way too pushed to be natural throughout society and such. Just another one of those things. Just like row, row, row your boat and all that. But it's from the story Gulliver's Travel. And the Lilliput Island, I think it was, I don't know what the island was called, but it was basically an island, a very small island off of some coast of somewhere that was home to a bunch of extremely small humanoid creatures. And this was like the most referenced thing, I guess you could say, in that entire story, or it was like the most popular thing. But anyway, the significance of this is that, well, the reason that the Lilliput Steps are like little footprints is because, one, the Lilliputians, or whatever they're called, they were very tiny people, obviously, like, I don't know, like Smurfs or something like that. Initially, I didn't know what to really take from this, but then when I looked into more detail on what these Lilliputians were like and in the context of the story, is that when this Gulliver guy went there, he and whoever he was with found these small people. They had their own like little, religion and politics and way of life and all that kind of thing, and inner social stuff. Just like you'd see from normal sized, from Gulliver's perspective, humans and their societies and such, in a way, at least from what it was described in a somewhat pompous way or whatever. Gulliver and some of his compatriots, kind of, at least Gulliver, I guess, the main character, looked at these guys kind of like he looked down upon them in a way. Like he looked at them in superiority, not just from their size, but also from the way that they operated in their little society and such. Like, at least it was described that they were very petty. They would always be fighting with each other. They would be petty, like squabble little things, like, little minute, like, insignificant stuff they'd be fighting over, just as that's what it's trying to reference, basically, is like Gulliver, this big guy, bigger much compared to them, this giant guy, he is like spiritually and morally superior, and he has compassion and all this stuff that is apparently what a normal human cares about. And these little Lilliputians or whatever, they care about like politics and little petty squabbles and fighting each other, arguing about stupid things, stuff that doesn't really matter. And basically, I guess, at least what this wiki said was like, a normal person is concerned with integrity, thankfulness, common sense, and compassion. His antithesis in the story, representing politicians or government, a Lilliputian, is a midget, both mentally and morally, compared with a normal moral person, that being the character Gulliver. So, yeah, initially I didn't know what to take from the Lilliputian and reference, and now I kind of look at it like these Lilliput steps representing, because, like, really, it's such a weird thing to reference, to me at least. I'm sure it was more popular, just another one of those push things that I didn't know much about Gulliver's travels in that story, but it was pretty obvious that it was something that was pushed more than it really deserved, but it's obviously that it's important that it's referenced so much in this way. In this case, I look at it in this representation, in this context, that kind of what we do in our own spiritual journey and our own journey and all that stuff, our own self-enlightenment, empowerment, is part of it is to kind of realize and identify these features of what a quote-unquote real human or a not real human, whatever, what the difference is in a way. Like, you know, we look at these stars, these actors, these minions, these politicians, these government people and such, these characters, these puppets. We look at them and we say, we see their characteristics and we want to not be like that. That is not the path of a true human being. That is the path of a piece of wood. I don't know. That is the path of the opposite path of a true human being. And the path of a true human being is the opposite of that. Like, you know, not petty things, moral, I guess you could say, you know, maybe morals, whatever. Maybe not morals defined by the society, but morals that come from yourself kind of thing, from your real person. Compassion, caring, thankfulness, appreciation, like all those aspects. And just being able to see the minions, that being these Lilliputians kind of thing, that they're unhuman, they're unsoulful, I don't know, they're negative aspects that they encompass, that they make up, and using that to realize what is really important in being a person or being a true spiritual being or whatever. Like, that's just how I guess I'm seeing this. 'Cause I don't know why else this would be something put in. I don't know. That's my representation, or that's my interpretation of this. And I was kind of surprised. I was like, oh wow, I shouldn't be surprised, but I was surprised to find that it kind of jumped out at me how much meaning when I looked a little bit deeper into it with this Lilliput steps, what it is likely there and represents. So, yeah. Okay, so on to the next one, and that is Milky Well. Now, this one, I still have some trouble interpreting what exactly it might mean, but I was doing a little bit of searching online of, like, you know, what is the symbolic meaning of milk and stuff like that. And some of the stuff I got, yeah, it was about what I expected. Not that I'm trying to give these meanings based on the possible symbolic meaning of some online crap, but just to give me a better idea of what to kind of be thinking about, maybe, like what these things could represent, and then trying to make my interpretation from it. Because this one, I initially didn't really have any idea of what to think about it, I guess. For this one, there's probably way better interpretations for this one, but I kind of just looked at it as like a representation of the female breast, almost. Like it's just it just looks like even the actual sprite in game of the well looks kind of like a lactating breast in a way, and just the fact that it's named Milky Well instead of just like some kind of well is like, okay, to me, yeah, it just kind of represents the female breast and kind of whatever that could symbolize to somebody, like a lot of things like nourishment, but besides that, I don't really know what else that could represent, I guess. But it is kind of interesting with that theme or whatever, with that thought that it like is a lactating breast, is that the vision that Ness sees in this particular location is about his mother, which Well, that's not very surprising because the vast majority of the sanctuary locations, visions that he sees are mostly involving his mother, but a lot of them are not. But in this case, it is interesting that it is specifically about his mother with the lactating breast. So it's like, hey, I don't know, it's just how I look at it. And the next one is Rainy Circle. Now, this one, once again, I kind of had to go to look up just kind of general symbology online of like what rain might represent. And it actually came up with more than I was expecting. That gave me a better idea of what I can interpret from it, I think. So, at least apparently whatever this person, the first result basically gave was rain can symbolize revival and regrowth, or even self-introspection. The one that mainly got me was like, oh, wait, self-introspection, at least to me, that also is just a syllable, or that's also just another way to say self-reflection. And it makes sense because the circle is a pool. In this case, the circle is a pool or a large puddle of water. And as, any person would know, is that a large puddle of water basically is like a mirror. So, in that regard, what I look at this one as is kind of like Rainy Circle is a mirror to look at yourself. It is a representation of self-reflection. I mean, obviously, being able to look at yourself is one of the most important things to kind of realize in a spiritual sense, that you have to reflect on yourself more so than anything else. And in fact, it's probably the only, if you're going to go with anything, it's probably the only important thing to really consider is reflecting upon yourself and looking at yourself and looking at the stuff around you and realizing that it is not a result of something else. It is not a reflection. It is not a reflection of something else on the outside of you, but it is really a reflection of what is on your inside, what is on the inside of you, the inner you. It is a reflection of that. Any negative things, even, positive things too, it is a reflection from you. So the only way that you can fix these problems in your world, in your bubble, in your perspective, is to first look at yourself and criticize yourself and fix yourself, I guess you could say. If you want to fix the things outside of you, you have to fix yourself first. So you first have to look within. That's really just the most important thing you have to realize, I guess. And that is what I see Rainy Circle as. And as well, being rainy, the representation of, or the interpretation of rain with revival and regrowth is like, you have to be self-critical when looking at yourself. But at the end of the day, you also have to be forgiving. You have to grow from it. You have to heal from that criticism, or from that self-criticism, that self-critique. You have to forgive yourself. And that's the only way you could really grow and fix things within your reality, I guess you could say, within yourself, is to self-reflect, to self-criticize, to forgive yourself as well when you do this, and to heal from it, I guess you could say. So, that's much more than Milky Well. It is much more, I think, a better interpretation possibly that I got from this one. So, yeah. Alright, so now we are on to Magnet Hill. This one, once again, I needed a little bit of help from the internet and all of its infinite knowledge and BS. Alright, so initially what I was thinking was, okay, I know that iron is, or whatever. Iron is a ferrous metal, which ferrous metals are magnetic generally. So I was like, all right, let's look up symbolism for iron. And unsurprisingly, it came up with some stuff. And, I think it has some merit to it. So, at least this first part of this interpretation is. So, iron, often associated with magnets, is apparently also represents, iron at least, qualities of power, strength, mental confidence, and strength to overcome challenging situations. Also, it's sometimes connected to a person without emotions. That one, I don't know. I mean, Ness doesn't really show that much emotions. And some people would say that stoicism, the kind of not showing of emotions or whatever, I don't really agree with that anymore. I think there is power in that, but there is also weakness at the same time, like not embracing your emotions. So, do with that as you will. But the one that I wanted to add was with magnets that I got from my own interpretation here is that, so magnets, as we've learned at least, magnets, they all have two poles, two opposing poles actually, not just like two like slightly different ones, like two completely opposite charged poles, which is what makes them magnetic, I guess. That's the property. So almost with the duality or whatever, like the yin and yang, the duality, the yin and yang, the oppositions, the opposite within yourself, good and evil. But also magnets can represent power and energy, at least with electricity, because at least for when you're making a voltage through a current, or when you're making a voltage through a wire or whatever, through metal, is that you are making a magnetic field with that wire. So every time there is voltage or every time there is electrical potential energy going between 2 points, there is some kind of magnet being formed there in some way, which, is an energy. It makes a frequency as well. But yeah, I'm just kind of throwing stuff at the wall there. Pretty interesting. And, as well as, weirdly enough, the magnets on Magnet Hill, most of them are shaped like, or at least the biggest one, is shaped kind of like, or almost exactly like a pyramid shape, which obviously we know that this shape has a lot of power and meaning in this realm with like the pyramids and the, the capstone and stuff like that on the Washington Monument or whatever. So yeah, obviously a lot of magical power and meaning behind the pyramid shape, but as well as, I believe, iron being a ferrous metal, being a crystal in some way, in some structure, tends to make these kind of shapes. I think, at least at the quote-unquote microscopic level, when you look at them, they kind of make like these triangular, weird, angular, pyramid almost kind of shapes and stuff, which I believe can also be associated with fractals and such. So that's definitely pretty interesting to consider, the magnets or the ferrous metal representing some kind of fractal in some way, and the power and the meaning behind that, and the duality, I guess you could say, with that, or whatever, the infinitely branching out kind of things, copies or whatever. So yeah. And the next one has, I believe, a lot more obvious, maybe you could say. Like, I didn't know about this, but then when I looked it up, it seemed like, oh, yeah, that seems like completely makes sense for that. And that is pink cloud. Now, initially, I didn't know what to think of pink cloud, but like I said, when I looked online, it was like, oh, so this is like apparently a common term. Pink cloud is apparently a term that is often used in the, I guess you could say, the community of using substances or whatever, like drugs and such. And or at least those that are trying to recover from drugs or trying to recover from these substances, abuse of them. So it is apparently often used to describe the feelings of euphoria that a recovering substance addict has while they are detoxing from their previous life of substance abuse. Basically, it can describe a feeling of extreme elation, a positive frame of mind, increased emotional awareness, confidence in one's commitment to sobriety. So yeah, like, I didn't know that at all, and, you know, it kind of makes sense in a degree, but apparently it also kind of has a negative connotation to it as well in that regard, is like, the negative aspect being that one that is, say, recovering from a drug abuse problem or something like that, any kind of abuse or any kind of drug or whatever, any kind of thing, is they would feel this amazing feeling of elation and euphoria during their detoxing phase, but it would almost give them too much confidence that they are going to kick their addiction, and it would actually kind of cause them to potentially have like a lapse in judgment and relapse back into their previous addiction state. So that's kind of it's kind of like a false confidence or whatever you say. Like it would cause them to actually, potentially it would cause them to actually go back to their bad habits. I was looking at it and I was like, you know what, I could see that more as like, at least not just on a substance abuse level, but on a spiritual level, even more so. Like, one could almost look at disconnecting, unanchoring from this reality, and like, one could almost look at that as sort of kicking some kind of addiction in a way, like kicking an addiction to the physical world, the physical realm in some way. Just the general elated feeling of goodness and positive frame of mind that comes as you are progressing through your spiritual journey, I think. Like, there's obviously a lot of negative things that come as well, and that is all a part of it. The general thing I would say is the positive kind of as it always kind of does at the end of the day, it outshines the negative at the end. And in this way, it is the positive part of your spiritual journey. It is the positive feeling that you get, the euphoria, the feeling of freedom and weightlessness and just general goodwill, good feeling, and all that stuff you get from during this journey and getting through it and such, and getting to this point. But, you know, realizing finally, being able to see clearly and see that things were so obvious that you didn't even notice before you started going on this path. And, you know, realizing your true potential, your true powers, whatever your true self is, just the general good feelings of that. But also, like I said before, is that it could represent the phase where you are kicking your addiction to this reality. You are learning to disconnect and unanchor from this place, and like I said, kicking your addiction to the physical realm, to this physical place. But yeah, I think Pink Cloud is pretty interesting, but that's what I think about this one, at least. Alright, so on to the next one, and that is Lumen Hall. Now, this one, I'm kind of taking a stab at the dark. I didn't use any sources or whatever. I didn't use any online search to kind of look up meaning of like luminous lichen or anything like that. So this one I'm going off straight feeling here. So there's many things that could be interpreted from this place, just as any of them, but on this one, I think there's a few that I kind of thought of. One is that this location is, I guess you could say, transcribing what Ness is thinking, what Ness's thoughts are onto the wall directly. And I kind of look at this like, because Ness, this and another time later after this part, when you're in Magic Hand, is the only times that you actually hear Ness's inner self, or his inner dialogue, his inner thoughts. This is the only time you ever hear them or see them, I guess. And it's interesting because just before you got to this particular location, like literally just before, this was before in the Tenda village where you cured their shyness. So, one could say like, hey, you cured the Tenda villager shyness, but at the same time you kind of sort of cured it a little bit here going through this location, kind of, because this is the first time you actually hear Ness's thoughts. So, that's one interpretation. But I think the more important thing that I thought about with this interpretation that's potentially even more obvious than that is Ness finally hearing from maybe his inner self, true self, or at least more so than before in a way, possibly. It's kind of, what I'm kind of trying to get at here is like, with us, I guess, or with everybody, is that we have communication with our true self and this meat suit, but often what we would kind of look at as communication or knowledge or whatever you want to say, things from our true self or inner self would be, we would call like gut feelings or instincts, or, what we would say our inner self is telling us, kind of thing. But most of the time we can't really completely transcribe it, I guess. Like, it gets muddled to some degree. We just kind of feel something, which, maybe that's the most pure form of communication, is in that way. But us as in this meat suit human avatar, we don't, or we kind of, it doesn't seem what we are accustomed to, I guess. But I would see this Lumen Hall as kind of Ness doing this, I guess you could say, is finally being able to connect to the earthly meat suit with the ethereal, spiritual, true self in direct communication that is undistorted or something like that. Seeing it plainly on the wall, exactly what he's saying, I guess. I think that has some interesting points to it, and that's mostly what I got from it. But it's also interesting that Ness visualizes in this place his father holding him as a baby. That's interesting because most of the time in the game, all the time basically, you never see Ness's father in person. You just see a telephone. You only communicate to him through the telephone, and he's the guy who saved your game and such. But the fact that in this location, this is the first time you see his father referenced in this way, is kind of weird. I don't know what to take from it in this regard, but yeah, that's interesting, I think, as well. Alright, so finally, on to the final, or at least the final in this sequence, your sanctuary locations, and that is Fire Spring. Now, with this one, I don't have that great of a personal inner knowing telling me what exactly this might mean, but I have a few guesses, a few stabs here with it. So, first, as we've been told by BuzzBuzz, Ness has to unite his power, his energy, with the earth itself through these your sanctuary locations, through this soundstone and such, through these melodies. And I would almost view a magma or a volcano or this little spring or whatever, this little geyser, I guess you could say, this little spring of lava or magma, almost as the power of the earth literally coming and revealing itself in a way, like, because that is, at least what we're told, is that magma and lava comes from the center of the earth, whatever you want to represent that. It comes from somewhere below, somewhere deep down, and it's coming from the earth in some way. So one can almost say that it's like the power of the earth revealing itself. And it makes kind of sense, because this is when Ness goes into his little magic hand coma, but I don't want to say that, because that's only if you do it in the sequence of, 1 through 8, all at their proper sequence and everything, because I have a feeling that if you do them in a different order, that you probably can go into that magic hand coma at a different time, so yeah. But in this case, you might be able to interpret that. I'm not going to, because you can most likely do it in a unordered sequence. But also, not just involving the earth itself, like magma coming from the earth, its power revealing itself is, I think, even more important to be able to think about in that regard, is like Ness's own power coming up from the surface, or coming up from the inside that was hidden or whatever, is that his power has finally revealed itself, or it is revealing itself in some way, and he is realizing that power, something that we also have to realize, or we also have, that is something we also have to realize, I think, at least. Like, we obviously know that we are powerful beings outside of this, or maybe even inside, or whatever, I don't know. We're extremely powerful beings, more so than we ever could have possibly imagined. We were first mind wiped, or whatever. We were brought here. We were born here, or whatever. We were given this avatar and everything. And with that, we have forgotten, or we have, I would never say that we have lost, but I would say that we have probably forgotten these latent or blatant, whatever, these powers that we always had, the powers that we always will have and everything. But finally being able to realize them is obviously a big part of your spiritual journey here, is realizing your powers and acknowledging them, and potentially even putting them into action in some way. Like, obviously being creative beings, being able to create manifest the reality around us in some way, to alter it, to change it, like, or just so many other things, like even, the stupid Matrix example, like bending spoons, healing this avatar, this body, like in incredible ways that we've always been brainwashed that we can't do, and everything. Just the powers that we definitely have, but we have forgotten. And I would see this fire spring location being a symbolic of that for Ness and ourself, is the powers that were deep within being hidden in some way, or the powers that are hidden within being revealed, coming to the surface, and being visible again, being acknowledged again. But yeah, that's what I interpret from this particular location. And something else I wanted to say is that, I guess you might be able to say the elephant in the room that I didn't really talk about, was the things that happen every time you go to one of these locations, the vision that Ness sees, and all of them involving something when he was a baby, or something when he was maybe when he first got put into his body, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, but I'm not going to talk about that here, even though it is very important, because that will be in the next episode for sure, where that actually happens, literally, I guess you could say. Like, the entire scene of those 8 things happening are revealed all at once, I guess. Like, they form a whole picture, finally. And that is when Ness goes to Magigant, which will be the next video. But yeah, after that extremely long video, most likely, that is my interpretation of all the, at least right now, that is my personal interpretation. I hope you have your own, maybe, and comment them or whatever, talk about them, anything, discuss them. The meanings of these sanctuary locations and what they mean in Ness's personal journey, and as well as our own personal spiritual journeys and such. So yeah, hopefully you found that interesting as I have, and I'll see you next time.